Hello, I'm Jon Judson. I'm owner-operator of Diversity Farms, and this is the Prairie Farm Podcast.
I'm Mark Kenyon.
I'm Dr. Julie Meechin.
I'm Steve Hansen.
I'm Jill Bebout.
Chad Gravy.
My name is Jeremy French.
Laura Walter.
Carol Hawksbergen, owner of Hoxie Native Seeds, and this is the Prairie Farm Podcast.
This is Hal Herring, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Podcast.
Skip Sly, Iowa Whitetail.
Valerie Van Coten, State Historical Society of Iowa.
Dr. Matt Helmer at Iowa State University.
My name is Kyle Laubarger with the Native Habitat Project.
I'm Judd McCullum. I appeared out of the wilderness, and this is the Prairie Farm Podcast.
Welcome to the Prairie Farm Podcast.
I want to tell you a little story about my wife and I. Several years ago, we found out that our insurance company was literally spending millions of dollars lobbying against conservation in our state and our federal level. And when we found this out, we said, And we decided right then we were going to get a new insurance company. And that brought us to McKay Insurance. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm pretty thorough when I make some of these decisions. And I looked through a bunch of different agencies, and they seemed great. But McKay Insurance stood out because of the people that I met there. They were wonderful. One of their agents actually went through the whole rigmarole to set us up with insurance that she and the agency didn't get a cut of. They just wanted to make sure that we were insured. Whether you're needing life insurance, health insurance, car, home and auto, reach out to McKay Insurance. They will get you taken care of. If you are tired of your insurance company lobbying against you, go to McKayInsAgency.com.
Nick has no sweat left to sweat.
I have sweat quite a bit today. I rehydrated with a vanilla Coke. I've never had a vanilla Coke before. That was my first ever. Thanks, Sean. Most asked about guest, Jon Judson, the man, the myth.
Most asked about?
Yes.
Are you sure?
I am dead serious.
Yeah, it's probably John and then Chris Jones, which, by the way, people, we have interviewed Chris Jones before. Yeah. You got to go way back in the archives. We're in the works there, but yeah.
And he's planning on coming back on before his election. But maybe Chris Jones, but the other one is Tom Rosberg.
Yes.
So he's agreed to come on, but yeah, people really want to hear from him.
I'd be happy to listen in when you can finally get Tom there. I
hard
talked to him the other day, and he was elbow deep in plant samples that he was trying to key out. So
okay,
it's hard to either get him out of the field or get him out of the lab.
Yeah. But the future generations are going to owe that man a lot. But man, part of the reason I want to talk to you, one, you make some of the best reconstructed prairies in Iowa, if not the absolute bests. If you took the 40 best reconstructed prairies in Iowa, your name would be listed on a bunch of them. There'd be a few other. Carl Kurtz has got some bangers. Tom Rosberg's got some bangers. Justin Meisen's got some bangers, but you're up there on a bunch of them. I'm curious, just from your point of view, what prairie reconstruction are you like the proudest of?
Well, I think certainly my home prairie is the one that I'm probably the most proud of. I have a lot more sweat equity in that prairie than probably any others. We spent hours and days and weeks collecting seed over multiple years off a variety of different remnants using old types of equipment, like an old Bluegrass stripper and a pull-type Alice Chalmers combine that had a 5-foot cutting head on it. And then hours and hours and hours of hand collecting native seed from primarily kind of a 3-county area. Most of ours was collected in Guthrie County. There's a little bit in Carroll County, which is where our home farm is, as well as a little bit in Greene County. And so we were able to collect from all different kinds of remnant sites. Every seed that was planted on our farm in our reconstruction was harvested off of a remnant site. So I know for certain that everything planted there is the same genetics that had been there for centuries.
You talk a lot about genetics just when I chat with you. You did a lot of practices, right? We walked through your farm for a couple hours just a little bit ago. You did a lot of things right with that. How much credit would you actually give to genetics? Like if you just took a rand of the same exact seed, but maybe from Missouri and Oregon and Wisconsin, took all these other genetics from other places that have slightly different climates or very different climates. How different do you think that would have been? Do you have any experience where you can kind of A/B test or notice any of that?
I don't know. short term, whether you would see a lot of differences, but I think long term you will. I mean, those plants had evolved and been in that environment for centuries. Mm-hmm. And so I tell people a lot of times, I don't always know what's right, but a lot of times I know what's wrong. And so I just feel that bringing seed from a closer proximity is going to give us a better opportunity for long-term survival and seed production and the development of a healthy prairie community if that seed source is relatively close. And certainly there is debate, and Tom Rosberg is a good one to debate that we need to maintain good genetics from maybe a broader range than what some people might think. I don't think you necessarily have to get them all out of your backyard, but I think that having some that are closer, so that way you match up more with the pollinators that are there. Things bloom at the right time, so they get pollinated by the insects that you have, I think is an important aspect of maintaining those closer genetics.
That is interesting. So if someone is starting from scratch, I want to do two different scenarios. First, they got a Brome pasture field and they want it to be prairie. We get this email a couple times a week. Hey, I got a Brome pasture field. What do I need to do to establish a high quality prairie? Could you walk us through that?
Well, ultimately, even before you decide on what you're going to plant, site preparation is a very critical part of the whole operation. I've seen too many failures where the vegetation that was there was too dominant, and even with minimal, sometimes like one application of Roundup, is enough to kind of set that non-native community back a little bit, but not enough to get rid of it so that you can establish a prairie long term. And so, and in some cases there's and you and I talked about that earlier, that a lot of people are wanting to plant prairie in their backyards, and a lot of times the lawn, the species of lawn weeds can be really problematic, and even some of the species of actual lawn grass, like bluegrass. Bluegrass is really difficult to get rid of, and really difficult to establish prairie plants in if you still have bluegrass.
What do you do to plant in the bluegrass?
You really have a couple options. One is herbicides, and the other is tillage, or a combination of those two things. And what I suggest is to make sure, one or two applications generally is not enough. And in some cases, a whole year worth of site preparation is better, so that you ensure that it's gone. A lot of those plants, I mean, if you go in and just till up bluegrass, you're going to kill part of it, but some of it's going to come back from the root. Yeah. And so you have to do repeated operations in order to try to get it cleaned up. There's also some problem weeds like crabgrass is particularly bad, forms a low mat. Normally, if we're out in a more of a agricultural landscape, we have weeds that come up, like foxtail or buttonweed or things like that you can go in and just keep mowed down in order to establish prairie plants. But in some of these lawn type ones, like crabgrass and white Dutch clover, just gets really thick mats, and even if you mow it, it likes it, and it creates an even more vigorous environment. So you really have to make sure you have those populations really maybe not completely eliminated, but the closer to having them eliminated before you decide to plant prairie seed, the quicker your results are going to be, and the better your results are going to be long term.
Something I was wondering about your prairie, John, I know a lot of it was seeded, even the majority of it, if not all of it, was seeded in one planting event. But I got to imagine you've done a fair bit of interseeding as well.
And we did do some interseeding because, especially in when we're collecting seed off of remnant prairies, all species don't produce seed every year or very much seed every year. We were kind of talking about compass plant, and you see these big compass plant years where everywhere you go you see compass plants blooming, and other years hardly any. And so if you're trying to collect seed like we were, and we did one big area like 15 acres, and there was almost no compass plant seed production that year, I went out the next season when it produced a lot, collected it, and then broadcast that seed over the top the next winter, so a year away. I think in most cases, you can get away with doing that into maybe the third year before you start creating enough competition from that existing planting to inhibit new seeds from becoming established in the prairie.
Sure.
So I think up to 3 years it's fine, and in fact I think it's a good idea. And even if you're not collecting your own seed,
that's a great take right there.
Yeah, even if you're not collecting your own seed and you're buying seed, there's some years where some of the seed that you may want may not even be commercially available.
Right.
You know, things like prairie phlox or prairie violets or false cromwell or something like that, you know, that's just not very common on the market. It's not available. So if you can get that seed the next year or two, you can go ahead and add that to that planting. The key part there is you want to continue to do the maintenance on that, though. You know, and so the maintenance part is the next part. Once we get the site established and we're pretty sure that we have most of those really competitive non-native species taken care of, you know, the planting part of it, you know, can be done over multiple years. You know, you develop a seed mix based on the kinds that are of soils that are there and the species that are most suited for those soils. And then if you can't get all of that seed, you can go out at a later time, 1 or 2 years later, and add seed to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of those species, though, like the prairie parsley that we saw and the sundrop, I assume those were added much later than from your original planting date.
No, actually, they were probably right about the same time.
Really?
That the
so
one prairie
that
had the prairie parsley on it.
Yeah.
I did an initial planting, and we'll talk about planting dates because there's a lot of discussion about when's the best time to plant prairie.
Sure.
And I have maybe some different notions than others might on that topic. But I did come back after that initial planting and add some seed the next fall.
Okay, so it was still within that 3-year window.
Almost all of it was within 1 or 2 years.
Would you go as far as to say that if somebody, let's say they had some really old CRP or something, and they're like, this was, you know, back then there was only a few species available that were required to have on your seed tag.
There's a lot of low diversity plantings out there, whether they were done for CRP or for wildlife habitat.
Is there any hope in interseeding significant diversity back into those, or is it going to take some significant spot spraying, or tillage even to open up a niche for some of those new seeds? Or
there is hope, and I can say everyone is different. So I can't generalize by saying you need to do this or you need to do that. Generally, if you want to get new prairie seed to establish itself and develop new plants, you have to reduce the below ground competition.
Sure.
And so the University of Northern Iowa years ago had a great project that brought us decades into the future on how to do that. In most cases, people were just wanting to throw more seed out there and maybe do a burn on it and say, okay, now I expect these great results, and they weren't getting them.
Yeah.
And they weren't getting them because there's still too much below ground competition. And their research led to the fact that if you keep things mowed, and especially the grasses mowed in those plantings, you'll reduce the below ground volume of roots. In essence, then what you do is you create openings below ground for other plants' roots to be able to grow. Because we were walking around earlier in the prairie, and there's all kinds of bare ground, and the question is why isn't there prairie plants there?
Yeah.
Well, there's not prairie plants there because all of the ground below that is full of dense roots, and it keeps new plants from getting established.
That is such a good description.
Some of the research that you and I did led, the project itself led from research that was done on grazing. And grazing will actually reduce the volume of native grass roots below ground. And in the process of reducing that volume, it created openings. And so they thought the same thing could happen if you use a mower to remove that. So their best success is with repeated mowings, sowing seed over it, doing repeated mowings, sowing or drilling that seed in, and then doing repeated mowings to keep the competition from those existing plants down in order for those new plants to. And I would recommend actually going into a second year on that, so that you have an opportunity. There were some species, and the one that stands out, I remember them saying they didn't get very good development of spiderwort. And it always kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit, thinking, well, what if we manage that system longer and keep those openings there longer?
Are you saying mow a whole summer and then plant interseed in the fall and then mow the whole next summer again, or what do you?
I'm saying you literally can go out, mow it in the springtime just to get rid of that residue, or burn it to get rid of the residue, sow or drill your seed. And then as soon as those plants start getting, a foot tall, go in and mow them down to 3 or 4 inches. So, and repeated mowing. So several mowings in a season.
Wow.
The idea is you want to keep that below ground root mass at a minimum.
Can't expand it because it doesn't have all the photosynthesizing tissue above.
So 2 things are going to happen. You're going to get better sunlight down to the ground, but most importantly, you're going to create openings in that root zone for new plants to become established.
Wow. We just we've talked a lot about interseeding on this, and we basically are like, good luck, but here you are telling us that there's a lot better way to do that.
And there's a lot of CRP projects that are getting renewed that didn't get planted with good mixes, and they ended up with low diversity plantings, and now the landowner is challenged with having to get better diversity in those stands in order to be eligible.
I hate selling interseed mixes. I hate it because I know, like, it's not going to show up. You know what I mean? They're just going to throw it on the ground. And until we chatted with you, even if someone really cared and was willing to do the work, I wouldn't have even known what work to tell them to do to be able to get that interseeding to show up. But you're saying plant it, mow, and in the next year maybe even mow the first half of the summer or the whole summer.
Right. And then get some fire on it, early fire after that.
Early fire. What, so if I had planted this last May, you mean fire next May? Or what do you mean?
Usually if you're mow, you don't have fuel for 2 years or 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And so as soon as you can get some enough residue in there, enough fuel to burn. And I even recommend that on regular plantings. I want to start mowing absolutely as soon as I can get it to carry fire. I mean, and if you're just burning foxtail, I don't care.
Yeah.
I want to get fire through that. And the reason I want to get fire through there as early as possible helps those prairie plants establish and become more mature more quickly, which helps alleviate and reduce the weed problems that you may have. And so there's been times where I had a heavy enough foxtail crop on there after planting that I was able to get part of it to burn the next year, and if not, the following year.
So you're cool burning a year after planting.
And often. I like to burn actually a few years in a row at the very beginning of the planting.
Wow.
To try to get stuff established as quickly
when do you burn?
Possible. I like to burn dormant. So end of March, 1st April.
Okay, so
you could do it in the fall too, and I just shy away from fall burns myself because of liability.
Yeah.
You still have standing cornfields nearby and stuff, and there's just lots more liability. Yeah. So you could still do dormant burns. Dormant burns is just when the plants aren't growing, and you have dormant plants. The end of March, and so end of March is a good time to be looking at doing it.
That is fascinating. Well, you said you have strong opinions about when people should be planting. What are those?
Well, it's not all about planting in the fall. Fall is a great time to plant. I do a lot of planting in the fall. We've extended it. We plant it in the winter time too. So we go out on frozen ground and spread seed, and we get great results from that. But
friends, the prairie's getting tall. It's getting time. The birds are a whistling and a chirping, and that means it is almost hunting season. So if you enjoy walking through the tall grass, pulling ticks off of yourself, and hanging out with your dogs, we highly recommend going to birdhuntersupply.com. Now, I understand if you want to be out on the landscape, you don't necessarily want to just hang out on a website, but Dr. Russ Benedict was correct when he said the prairie was actually a very adverse place and we need to be prepared. So prepare yourself for your hunting season, your trail walking season, and your bird dog hunting season at birdhuntersupply.com. They've got everything you need for yourself on the bird hunting and everything you need for your bird dog. We highly recommend. The assortment of equipment that they provide on there is extensive and far above my head, but they have exactly what you need. Not only will they take care of you in that, but they actually help take care of the land as well. When I was talking to the owners, they said, we actually donate a certain amount of money to conservation every single year. And I asked them, oh, do you have a donation button at the end where people can donate when they check out, which is really common? And he said, no, we actually donate from our profits. So they literally take their earned profits and donate that to conservation efforts because they care. They want to see the landscape have habitat and stay healthy for future generations. Highly, highly recommend birdhuntersupply.com.
But later plantings are not necessarily going to be failures. And later, I mean summer plantings. I've got 2 examples on my own farm that are really diverse, beautiful plantings. I mean, I've got, false cromwell and prairie lilies and New Jersey tea that came up in this planting, and 2 of those plantings, one on one of my daughter's birthday, Savannah, which was July 13th. We were walking around out there today, and there's prairie parsley and bastard toadflax and tuberous Indian plantains and New Jersey tea and red root, just some really conservative species, and they came in planting in the middle of July. And I did one on my birthday, which is exactly a week later, July 20th, and that planting is stunning. and it's 29 years old now, and it's a beautiful planting. We have no weed issues. We have beautiful prairie there. So I say, even if you plant that late and you do the maintenance, so a lot of that seed is going to set and wait for the conditions to be right, which is going to be the next spring. I do warn, though, that there are some species, I mean, Liatris, for example, and prairie blazing star specifically, really prefer that cool, moist soil. If you can get it planted in the winter or in the fall, you seem to get better stands if you do that. So in some cases, if you end up planting late like that, you can come back in that next fall or winter with some additional species if you're concerned about it.
Man, that is really fascinating, because Justin Meisen was the one. He was like, no, if you good grass stands happen in April, May, maybe early June, but the forbs happened earlier. But I mean, your prairie was a testament against that, where your prairie was beautiful, and the grass is really, what was interesting was on the edges that you had plants that would do really well on the edges because you had a pathway that had shallow rooted species on it. So it was like the edges, the roots could kind of dig in under there, and your big blue stem there was a lot taller and a lot thicker than the big blue stem in the middle of the field. The big blue stem in the middle of the field was being dominated by purple prairie clover.
Right.
It was just fascinating.
Yeah, and there's just more resources available along the borders than out in the middle of the prairie. The stature of our prairies, now that they're 25 to 30 years old, is not near what it used to be. The grasses are not near as tall and thick as they used to be because those available resources are not there. We talked earlier about one of the plantings we did here at our Tool Prairie. It was seed off of the prairie. And after about year 3, it was just tall, thick grass. And I thought, this is not really what I was hoping for. And within a year or 2, I think it's because it was put on cropland and there was a lot of nutrients still available for those plants. Yeah. And so the grasses really thrived in that environment. And after a couple years, a lot of those nutrients had been tied up or utilized by the plants. And the whole stature of the prairie and the grasses came down to probably 50% of what it was.
Wow.
You could walk through it and it was thigh high instead of chest high.
That is so fascinating.
So, and it's all about that competition, and that competition is also to your value, in that all that competition helps keep a lot of the weedy stuff out. So there's only a few weed species I really worry about. Things that have evolved with fire, like sweet clover, for instance. White or yellow sweet clover seems to thrive in prairie areas. Some of those things we physically go out and remove when we have a chance, because it will thrive along with the prairie. But other species like Canada thistles, I don't worry about them. The prairie eventually ends up beating them out. So we just mow and burn and when we're trying to control thistles. And in fact, if you spray, chances are you're going to do more damage than good. Because you're going to end up killing the species that are going to create the long-term competition to keep the thistles out. So by spraying, you set yourself up for a long-term problem rather than letting the prairie do its thing and winning out over the Canada thistles.
So Canada thistles putting on seed right now. Or I guess not when you guys are listening to this, but when we're talking about it, let's say, a month ago you caught a patch of Canada thistle. What would be your plan to get rid of this patch of Canada thistle?
My plan would be I'd wait until it's blooming, and then I would go in and mow it.
Mow it to the dirt, or just clip it off?
Either way, I don't care. I just want the plants mowed off so that they can't produce a bunch more energy.
Sure.
And to keep them from going to seed. One of the things that I've seen, and it's not 100%, is that if you mow Canada thistles when they're blooming, they won't rebloom. They're a perennial, so they don't have to produce seed every year in order to survive. Unlike musk thistles, which are biennials, they got to produce seed. So if you mow them off, they're going to produce more flowers and try to grow seed. You mow those off, they're going to produce more flowers until way late in August when that plant's shooting up a couple of little sprouts like this with a little bitty flowers on it. It's going to keep trying to make
That's
flowers.
Crazy.
And the good thing about, if there is a good thing about Canada thistles, is that because they're biennial, they don't necessarily keep blooming through the whole season. And so a lot of times
perennial?
They're perennial. They're perennial. So you can go in many times and just do one mowing at the right time, and then not have to deal with them. If you see a few more coming on, doesn't hurt to go out and mow them. But we mow them, and then we start burning as soon as we can. I want to get fire through there because I want to change that from a Canada thistle environment to a prairie environment.
So Canada thistle doesn't do well with fire, you're saying?
I'd say it doesn't care about fire. I'd say the prairie cares about fire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to manage for the prairie, and the prairie when it
stimulating the growth.
When the prairie is doing well and matures, creates so much competition that it just crowds the Canada thistles out.
Have you ever thought about flash grazing just like once every 6 or 7 years your prairie, just to like get some hooves on it, get them pushed through, have them get a group of 20 of them and have them on 3 acres at a time, and then push them on to the next 3 acres? Have you ever thought about doing anything like that?
I'm certainly a proponent of getting livestock and grazers out on the prairies. I think it's going to give us increasingly more diversity, both in plant and insect life. I mean, research has shown that. I think there's some real value, and I think we need to look at that seriously. Where I'm going in and collecting seed and harvesting seed, I'm a little less likely to do that, because if I open it up, instead of getting what we used to have is native annuals and biennials, I may get non-native annuals and biennials. And so I'm a little more reluctant to do that, but I think that there's opportunity, and I think that it would behoove us to, even through USDA programs, to look at trying to create opportunities for people to get livestock on even CRP or wetland reserve acres. I
was just talking to some, also behoove. That's good. That's a good pun. I was talking to a really great guy, Steve DeYoung. He's been on the podcast before. Good friend of Dad's. Flipper. And he and I were talking about, it would be really cool to see, like, because people are going to be increasing their herd here in the Midwest for the next decade or two, because out west they're struggling to increase their herd because it doesn't grow any grass because they don't get enough rain.
Too droughty.
Yep. And so they'll probably be doing that.
Aquifer depletion.
Yeah, aquifer depletion
is really bad.
And so here in the Midwest, we can handle increasing the herd quite a bit. And he and I were talking about, like, it would be great if CRP that was coming out of its 10-year contract there was an incentive. Well, obviously we'd want to put it back into CRP, but there could also be an incentive to, instead of doing that, keeping it the native warm season grass and wildflower pasture and turning it into a native warm season grass pasture for grazing cattle. One, it would alleviate corn and beans without dipping into the CRP pool, because there's only so many acres of CRP you can have. But it would keep things as pasture, and it would grow our beef herd, which we really need
keep
to do
things
right
as
now.
prairie.
Yes, and it would allow things to stay as prairie. Now, obviously, things can get grazed down to nothingness. And recently on the podcast, we had Hamilton Native Outpost owners, and they were amazing. And they grazed cattle, they grazed bison, they grazed sheep, they grazed goats on prairie and on introduced cool seasons. But I think it'd be cool to make it more of an Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri culture to transition or have CRP and grazing linked. Not the same. I don't necessarily want taxpayers to fully pay for a pasture for someone else to be able to produce beef on, but it is better for the CRP to get grazed every 4 or 5 years. It's better for the ground, and cattle are one of the only things that'll beat out the big blue stem. On some of these plantings that only had 18 species put in them.
Well, and that's why you see more diversity in some of those plantings, is because they keep that grass competition down. Just like we were talking about, if you plant those a lot of those early plantings were just really heavy in grass, and so that's kind of what led to the question about, well, how do we get more forbs in there? Well, that's what we talked about earlier was a way to get those forbs back in there. But in some cases, those forbs are there, but they're being so suppressed by the grasses that if we would figure out ways like grazing to reduce the vigor of those grasses, you'd see more vigor in the wildflowers that were there.
Well, we do have a little bit of a time crunch today. Sorry, everyone listening, but Kent had one last question for you before we were going to take off.
You've been a part of Prairie Reconstruction for 30 plus years now, at least a prairie enthusiast, and doing your own work for most of that time. We're seeing in the prairie community a changing of the guard right now. A lot of well, first of all, you, along with Carol and Carl Kurtz and Dan Allen, John Ozenbaugh and Bill Buman and Roger Schwery, and I mean, there's a whole host of you guys that have been kind of the pioneers of getting prairie reconstruction to what it is today here in Iowa. But you guys are all kind of that same age class where retirements are happening and people are moving on. And I imagine a lot of you, just like Carol did, which, by the way, we should point out, today is 1 year ago today, Carol passed away. Yep. And I think he would be smiling right now to know that we're talking with you.
Sitting in a prairie.
Sitting in a prairie, yep. And I got to think that all of you guys, and there's a lot of ladies out there too, Laura Jackson, who hopefully we get quite a few more years out of Laura, but some of these people who have been here for a long time, you're thinking about, well, what comes next with all of this that we've put all of our blood, sweat, and tears and finances into, and what does prairie even look like for Iowa over the next 50 years, next 100 years? And I'm sure you guys have some strong opinions on that. And it just makes me wonder whenever I get a chance to talk to somebody from that class of prairie reconstructionists, prairie conservationists, what do you personally think it lies ahead for Iowa prairies? Maybe you could do a little bit of what I hope happens versus what I think happens, just based on your experience and seeing how the prairie reconstruction, I don't know what you would call it, movement maybe has gone in your time.
Well, I'm actually pretty thrilled at looking at all of the really good, young, dedicated biologists that are in the field now. I mean, way more than when we started.
Yeah.
The Iowa Prairie Network, when I first became involved with it, 25 years ago or something, we met, 15 of us met in the library and in Ames, and now we meet at the high school in Ames, and there's 200 to 300 people that attend it. I mean, there's really become a great movement, and it's been really good in Iowa. There's really been a push for what we call local genetics, at least genetics associated with the prairie that was originally here in Iowa. And I'm seeing more and more of these young biologists that are understanding the value of good diversity. I mean, early on, and you can't really blame people, the seed material wasn't available. You could get some big blue stem and switchgrass and maybe some Indian grass, and those early plantings look like that. These young biologists know that we get a lot better ecological value from these really diverse plantings. And so I mean, I've been really happy. I work with a lot of young biologists, and they're doing great things out there, and they're encouraging people, landowners, to be more and more involved with good restorations and reconstructions on their property. So I'm confident in that way. I'm just hopeful that as a nation we can see value and have programs, USDA programs, Fish and Wildlife Service programs, and specifically USDA programs that can have a significant impact on the landscape, not just individual projects, but on the landscape. That's where we need to make the changes.
Man, we really appreciate it. Before we go, could you tell us a little bit about what's sitting behind us here in the field?
So behind us is a nice piece of remnant prairie that I had an opportunity, my wife and I, Kay Newman, had an opportunity to buy several years ago. It's interesting in that the person that we bought it from is a distant cousin of mine. One of his great grandfathers and one of my great grandfathers were brothers.
Okay.
And when he had an opportunity to buy this farm, he was more interested in the cropland part of it, and he called me and asked me if we were interested in buying the prairie, and I said absolutely. So in the process of doing that, we bought some cropland around it, so we ended up buying a 40, and since that time we've taken seed off of the remnant prairie and planted 3 smaller fields around it. So now the whole 40 is seeded down to prairie, and there's about 10 or 12 of it is really good, high quality remnant prairie.
It's awesome. Unbelievable. I mean, there's porcupine grass, not sedge. Porcupine sedge is a lot easier to grow and harvest seed from. Porcupine grass is very hard to get seed from and to grow. There's obviously world milkweed. You've got lead plant behind us, round-headed bush clover, all of the common stuff you would normally find, plus about 50 other species that you hardly ever see. It's really cool.
Interesting stuff like prairie turnips and flowering spurge and scurfy pea or wild alfalfa, just species that are not found in very many other places in the area or even in this county. So,
man, I feel really privileged that you would sit down with us today and show us around your farm, John. I really appreciate it.
I'm always happy when I'm on this prairie.
Yeah, I can only imagine why. I mean, it's like as peaceful as it gets out here. And it's serene. The prairie does something to your blood. That's what Dad used to say. The prairie gets in your blood. You can't help it. If you're around it, you can't help it.
He's a wise man.
Yeah, thank you. Well, for everyone listening, if you want Jon Judson to help you with your prairie, good luck. He's super busy. He does some of the best prairies in the wild. You know we've talked highly on his stuff on this podcast.
Man in demand.
Yeah, he really is. And he's one of 2 or 3 people that if Ken or I have questions, we on the prairie we call and
called John multiple times this last year, this last spring.
Absolutely, and you've always been gracious with your knowledge, so thank you. We a lot of people, whether they will know it or not in the future, will have learned a lot directly or indirectly from you, and I'm very grateful for you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, just like Jon Judson, don't forget conservation. It doesn't just happen in the great open spaces of prairie like this. It happens one mind at a time.